This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the latest edition of Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey, Brian Tripp with you here as round one of the college football playoff is officially in the books. Tripp and I both witnessed history in terms of being on a campus for the first ever on-campus playoff game. Great environment, we'll get into that as well. Big Ten, solid weekend, right, Tripp? 2-1 so far, pretty predictable. Penn State, Ohio State moving on. Indiana season coming to an end. A lot to break down from this weekend. A lot of negativity, Tripp, from this weekend. Maybe predictable for college football standards. But let me ask you this. Was it a good weekend? You have fun? You're witnessing history?
Yeah, and I dressed for the weather, right? All this talk about all the cold as you're going to South Bend and the scene and the spectacle, the snow falling, everyone bundled up, the Notre Dame fans lining up to get into the stadium at 7 a.m. to go and start tailgating for a game that wasn't occurring until 8 o'clock at night. But I think the pageantry, the history, the tradition of college football, these late December games, Happy Valley, all the snow covering the grounds around the stadium, just bitter cold. We were both there, bundled up. I thought it was overall a success. Obviously, I think, as you said, there were no surprises in the four teams that advanced. But how they advanced, maybe a bit of a surprise to some and a shock when you look at the system, and it automatically leads to the discussion, well, is this 12-team model correct? And what can we do? Why are there so many blowouts in an opening round? Is it just circumstance that it happened once this year? Because you look back, like there's been blowouts in big games before. Just because it's a big game doesn't mean it's going to be a close. You've seen it in Super Bowls, national championship games, and even in the 4-team college football playoff. But why? Why were all four games so lopsided here on this opening weekend? But overall, a rousing success, and I still have all my fingers and toes.
Same, barely. I'm still a little. I'm wearing 2 sweatshirts for this pod on Monday morning in Parks. I'm still cold from Saturday. But I'm with you. I thought walking away, being at Beaver Stadium for that environment, obviously the game was a blowout, but I thought the environment was great. You look around, and sure, the games were not competitive, but I thought having meaningful playoff games in home atmospheres, that idea was proven by far to be the right one for the committee. But it was a great, it's just, that's the way college football should be with how great home field advantages are. I'm glad we finally were smart enough to put playoff games on home field. I thought that was a success.
Well, this is what it's all about, right? I just talked about the history, the tradition. Every school has its unique aspects of home field advantage, but to see a whiteout, and that's where you and I were, to see that in person in a postseason game in late December, we celebrate college football and the campuses, the communities, the fans, the alumni coming back to their schools, some in these remote outposts. Like South Bend, Indiana isn't a major city. State College, Pennsylvania is not a major city, and they're not always easy to get to. But everyone finds a way to fill these gigantic stadiums and celebrate it 6-7 times a year. So why do we abandon that when we get to the postseason in college football to go play warm weather, neutral site, maybe indoors, maybe outdoors? This is what makes the sport special. And then to see that in games of this magnitude made this weekend so much more enjoyable.
Agreed, and that's why when you look at the expansion of 12 teams, which I think is part of the reason why you see a lot more parity this year compared to previous years. Like you said, you see that atmosphere at Notre Dame Stadium was Friday night was awesome.
Yep.
Look, Beaver Stadium was electric on Saturday. Ohio Stadium, look, credit to Tennessee. The Vol invasion was real. But to the Buckeye fans that showed up, they were loud and tried to do their best. Like, you got great environments in those 4 home playoff games. And what bothers me, Tripp, is while that should be celebrated, and I think overall, the first weekend of the 12-team playoff, I would consider a success.
Yes.
All you're seeing on social media, on talk shows from media members is now revisiting history and trying to say, oh, well, the committee sucked. They got, these games stink. They got the teams wrong. How come this team wasn't included? Why is Indiana in there at 11-1? Why is SMU in there? I can't believe that these teams are chosen. It frustrates me to no end, Tripp, because college football is the only sport where we do this. Like you mentioned before, there are blowouts in every postseason of every sport. I mean, go to the NBA playoffs. We saw the Seahawks beat the Broncos. Was it 43-9? Like that game was a blowout in the first quarter. But no, you don't hear anybody ever in any other sport say, well, why was that team included? Why did the Broncos make it? We should have put the Patriots in there. Like, this is ridiculous. And it bothers me to no end because this is always a discussion of college football of that team was not deserving. And now you want to rewrite history because the game you won was not competitive. Instead of, how about doing this, Tripp? How about we look at Notre Dame and say, instead of questioning Indiana's resume at 11-1, maybe let's just say, no matter who was going to Notre Dame Stadium that night, Notre Dame was winning because they're a damn good team. Same with Penn State. Same with Ohio State. Like, you want to talk about, well, Tennessee shouldn't have been in there. SMU should have been in there. Indiana should have been in there. Oh, okay. Well, who are you putting in there that's making it a competitive game? Because there's no one I can look around the country, Tripp, you're telling me would put up a better fight than any of those three teams did. And it's a knocking down of teams instead of recognizing, well, how about this? How about those teams that earned home field advantage in round number one? How about they're just damn good? Can we say that? Can we say are we allowed to say Notre Dame is good? Ohio State is good. Penn State is good. Like, why is it always happens like this? The revisionist history, and it bothers me to no end. And I don't know about you. I was surprised that was kind of the main talking point coming out of this weekend.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different ways you can go with it. And I agree with you. I think the teams that won are just that good. But this has always been what makes college football unique and somewhat special, is this debate. Well, 1 versus 2. Well, should number 3 have been in the national championship? Like, this is what college football has been for decades. Now, you expand the playoff to 12 teams. Is the goal to put the best 12 teams, hypothetically, you think, on paper in the playoff? Because everyone's still talking today, well, Alabama would have put up a better game. I don't know. I watched Tennessee go into the shoe and get demolished. It was 21-0 before the game even kicked off, it felt like. So what's your revisionist history there? Here's the thing. The best 12 teams and the 12 teams that deserved an opportunity to play for a national championship based on their regular season were in the playoff. Yeah, we had questions. Was SMU as good as their record? Was Indiana as good as their record? No, but they deserved an opportunity to show us because they won their games in the regular season. They beat the 6-6 teams on their schedule. They didn't lose 24-3 against Oklahoma. These teams deserve to be in because they beat who was on their schedule. Now, the beauty of a 12-team playoff is, as opposed to a 14 playoff in the past, Indiana would be on the outside looking in, and we would never know if they were good enough. Here's the thing. We now know they are not one of the best 8 teams in the country. And I think the best 6 teams in the country are left in this field. And the 6 best teams that we've seen the entirety of the year: Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State, Georgia, Texas, and Notre Dame have unquestionably been the 6 most consistent best teams in college football over the duration of a regular season that spans from late August to early December. And those 6 are remaining, along with Boise State and Arizona State, who are now in the same spot that their brethren, SMU, Clemson, Indiana, they're still in that prove-it spot. Maybe they do belong. Maybe they don't. We don't know yet. But the 6 best teams are left. If you want to complain about why did we have blowouts in the first round? Because the way the tournament was seeded. Notre Dame and Penn State, if it is seeded 1 through 4 gets a bye, then instead of Notre Dame and Penn State playing games where they blow out the opponent in that opening round, and Texas, then you're getting Boise State versus Indiana. Then you're getting Arizona State against SMU. And they're probably great games. And no one's complaining. It's not who's in, it's how it was seeded. And you saw a team like a Penn State, like a Notre Dame, like a Texas, all at home, which automatically gives you an edge, and already being the better team. Well, no kidding, you're going to get some lopsided scores in that, because the better teams who are not just slightly favored, like Ohio State, Tennessee's one thing. Ohio State was impressive. That was impressive. But to have teams that are already favored on their home field, and that the country believes, the committee, the country, the voter, like whoever, anyone that watches college football believes aren't just incrementally better, but a whole lot better. Like, these are teams that are more than 7-point favorites. That's significant. And they did what they were supposed to do. It's not who was in, it's how the tournament was formatted. That's why I had the blowouts.
I would agree with, I think if anything, right, we have to revisit not the team selected or the process, how you see the tournament. I'm with you, but a lot of what you said I agree with, but yet still here we are talking about, frustration, and it really highlighted here by Kirk Herbstreit. We'll get to him a lot here in this episode, since he really decided to just unload the clip and just really let his feelings be known on any and every platform he was on. After Ohio State's blow-win over Tennessee, he was on SportsCenter, and he was asked for his biggest takeaway from the entirety round one of the college football playoff. And here's Kirk Herbstreit. You could argue the voice of college football for ESPN, who's broadcasting these games. This was his initial big takeaway from round number one.
That I hope next year the committee won't get caught up in what the social media and a lot of people who are fringe fans get caught up in, which is wins. They had 11 wins. They must be good. Who did they beat? I think is much more important than how many wins you have. That's old school way of approaching it. Indiana having 11 wins and beating nobody, that doesn't mean they're one of the 12 best teams. Winning's obviously important, but just because you have 11 wins doesn't mean you're better than a team that maybe had a tougher road that had 9 wins.
And I have so much respect for Kirk Herbstreit. I think he is typically the most reasoned and respected voice in the sport. And his voice carries a lot of weight. That's why do we pick that clip to share? Because his voice carries a lot of weight. I'm not sure if it was just the immediate aftermath of the game. And look, here's a guy who was in South Bend on Friday night, and then's going to Columbus, and he's covering NFL on the West Coast on Thursday. Like, at this point of the weekend, this is a guy who's exhausted. Then to put him in that spot, in the national spotlight, to make that kind of declaration about the playoff. However, I couldn't disagree more with him, because he's still playing that hypothetical. The game he just watched is Tennessee versus Ohio State. Tennessee and the SEC, like, that hypothetical that he's posing is, okay, if you're not going to put Indiana in, that means you're putting Alabama, Ole Miss, or South Carolina in the playoff. What did we see from Tennessee against Ohio State that warrants that type of, and you can say it's not about the number of wins, it's about the wins. But what about the losses? Ultimately, this tournament is to decide who is college football's national champion. So are we going to give a team who lost to Oklahoma and Vanderbilt an opportunity to win a national championship just because they have one win against Georgia? That team deserves a shot? No. It's to reward a team that's had the national champion. Yes, it is the best team at the end of the season, best team in college football. But you also have to win the games that are played to earn an opportunity to prove that you're the best team. And I don't mind. Like Georgia, they lost twice. Any other year, Georgia doesn't have a shot at winning the national championship. But because of this playoff, they still have an opportunity to do so. No qualms with that. But we can't just say, oh, the best 12 teams need to be in. What gives you the right to say that these aren't the best 12? You got to, the regular season has to mean something. It still has to mean something. And was it devalued a little this year? I'd say a little, but still meaningful. Games still were fun to watch, magnitude. You felt like there were stakes out there. But we can't just say, on paper, in the beginning of the year, we thought they were one of the best 12 teams that should be in the field. Because that's basically what that argument is. That's nonsense.
And that's my biggest frustration. Kirk is not the only one saying that. It's just like, if anyone was against a 12-team playoff, the biggest argument was, well, you're going to devalue the regular season. And that's what's most important for college football is the journey to the playoff, right? And the journey to the championship. Well, if you were then going to say that, and then all of a sudden at the end of the year, bang the drum for a 9-3 Alabama team or a 9-3 Ole Miss team because they're quote unquote better than Indiana, SMU, etc. Like you just said, what you're doing is you are saying the regular season doesn't matter. Because I saw this team lose 3 times, but I still think they're good. Look at their recruiting rankings. Look at what we thought they were going to be in the beginning of the year. Like that still holds weight more than the 12, in some cases, 13 games we saw across the regular season. There's no doubt about it, right? If you look at roster construction, Alabama's roster is better than Indiana. No one's going to argue the opposite. But what Indiana did that Alabama did was take care of business. Like you said, Alabama lost 2 bad games.
The Philadelphia Eagles had one of the best rosters in the NFL last year. They stunk at the end of the year because they had no team chemistry. There's more than how many 5 stars, 4 stars, great transfers you get to determine who's the best team. Sometimes the best team has moxie, character, intangibles, great coaching. The New England Patriots weren't always the best team in the National Football League. But teams, there's something special about it. Alabama lost to Tennessee. Tennessee just got throttled in Columbus. And then right after the game, you're saying Alabama deserves to be in because you saw a blowout in South Bend or because SMU was in? You have to give the teams a chance and reward them for what they accomplished. And the Big Ten and the SEC, more often than not, are going to have 4 teams in the field. If you can't finish in the top 4 in your league, then you don't deserve an opportunity to play for a national championship.
I agree. The last thing I'll say here is I just don't think blowouts are that big of a deal. Want, because this is also what people don't like. They want it both ways, or they want upsets and great games. But then also when it comes down to the Elite Eight, the Final Four, the national title game, they want these big, sexy matchups. You can't have both. If you want Indiana to beat, let's say, Notre Dame, but then you're upset that Indiana's playing, I don't know, Georgia in the national title game. You can't have it both ways. You want upsets, but also you want some of these blue blood classic matchups that we've seen in previous years. Sure, it was ugly, 4 blowouts. Really, none of the 4 games. Maybe Clemson for a little bit kind of gave you a thought of maybe they can come back and make it a game against Texas. Otherwise, for the most part, neither were competitive. But now what you're doing is setting up 4 games on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day that are bangers. I'm very excited for that. I think we should have a really good playoff going down the stretch here. I don't think because you had 4 non-competitive games in the opening round of the playoff that all of a sudden now we have to just rethink everything. Go back to 4, go back to the BCS, rethink the selection process. It's okay. Sometimes the better teams just win. And sometimes there aren't 12 teams. Tripp, we had blowouts in a 14 playoff. We had more blowouts than not in a 14 playoff. We couldn't even get in years the number 3 or the number 4 team to be competitive. Let's relax. All is not broken. We don't have to set the world on fire. We don't have to have everything be a referendum on the sport of college football and how our champions decided. It's so frustrating because, like I said, we started this pod I thought it was great that home, there's
unbelievable
home playoff games. And it's just so frustrating that positivity is wiped away because fans were upset that they didn't get competitive games they wanted to on a Saturday afternoon.
Ultimately, the goal of the 12-team playoff, or any playoff, is do all teams that deserve a shot at winning the national championship get that opportunity? Well, this year, there's probably 6 teams that deserve an opportunity to win the national championship. The teams I mentioned, right? The 3 Big Ten teams, the 2 SEC teams, and Notre Dame. Well, guess what? They're left.
Yeah, and like I said, we're going to get some good games on New Year's Day, New Year's Eve. We're done complaining. We're moving on. Let's talk about a positive here, Chip. I think, at least for me, the most impressive performance over the weekend in round number 1 had to be Ohio State, right? We came into that game. It was the best matchup in terms of Tennessee, Ohio State, the closest ranked 2 teams we had in this first round. Questions about how Ohio State would come out, how they would play against a staunch Tennessee defense. What would the crowd be like? What would the players' mindsets be like? How would Ryan Day and Chip Kelly call the game? Your biggest impression, Chip, from Ohio State, just absolutely dominant victory from the jump, was what?
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think with all the noise, the layoff, what would that Michigan hangover be like for Ohio State? There's no question. It's funny because now I'm going to go and say, no question on paper, this is one of the most talented teams in college football. And throughout the course of the regular season, I think they proved it for 11 weeks. Their only loss was against Oregon on the road by 1 point until that disaster in the final week of the regular season at home against a team that has their number right now. And Michigan, it's their rival, and you just never know what's going to happen in that game. I thought Ohio State played like in this game the team that we thought they were. And this was an opportunity for Chip Kelly and Ryan Day to right some wrongs against the Tennessee team. Like if you remember last Thursday, we talked about, I thought matched up pretty well against Ohio State because of their defensive front and their run game, their ability to shorten the game and what they could do on the road in a very difficult environment. And Ohio State, I thought right off the bat, using Will Howard throwing the short passing game, this little screen game, they used the passing game to set up the run. And then they were able to hit some big passes downfield as well with their elite wide receivers with Egbuka and Smith. And really, for them to come out and start that way, Tennessee needed this to be a low possession, low scoring type of game, a defensive game, kind of like that Ohio State Penn State game, the Ohio State Nebraska game, the Ohio State Michigan game, right? We saw a couple of those games for Ohio State down the stretch this year. Instead, this turned into a shootout because Ohio State set up the run with its passing game. They got Will Howard into a rhythm, and that was Chip Kelly saying, hey, look, this is what we have to do to be successful. And they finally went to what I think everyone in the country thought they should do all season long, and it took them until the playoffs to get there. But to answer all that noise and to come out and do it the way they did, so incredibly impressive.
I agree. And we talked to Joey Kaufman on Thursday's pod about, because I thought this game was going to come down to Will Howard, right? We kind of talked about and waved the white flag, at least going into the game. They probably won't be able to run the ball. Can Will Howard, if the game is put on his shoulders, can he win the game? I believed he could do it. And I thought Tripp, he had the best game of his Ohio State career on Saturday, like you said, where he was smart, efficient, put the ball in places where only his receivers could get it, took, kind of set up the deep passing, but like you said, kind of starting off slow, slicing and dicing, then open up the deep passes, hitting those deep shots when they're out there. Jeremiah Smith, 2 nice touchdowns for him, and getting the floodgates open early. It's what I don't get, Tripp, and we finally saw it, so better late than never. But clearly, on almost any given day, Jeremiah Smith is the best player in the field. And you saw in this game, he balled out 6 catches, over 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. This was only the second game. Or I should say, let me put it this way. There's only been one game this season where he's had more than 6 catches. It was the Oregon game where he had 9. Why they don't feed him more and get him involved more, again, hopefully this is the start, if you're an Ohio State fan, of seeing the ball in number 4's hands a lot more. But good things happen when you get Jeremiah Smith the ball. Will Howard, I thought, was really good in terms of his decision-making, setting up the offense. Like you said, they threw the ball to set up the run, which I think really worked nice, and they're able to run the ball better than I thought they were going to be able to against what has been a really good Tennessee rush defense all year long. That was a sharp, focused effort from Ohio State that I think also kind of shows you, Tripp. Yeah, they have a Michigan problem, no doubt about it. And when that game comes around next year, it's a different, we can talk about that then. But against every other team, this is now the 3rd top 10 victory they have on the season. They're 3-1 against top 10 opponents. They play well right now against everybody not named Michigan. And the good thing for Ohio State is Michigan ain't in the field. I think there's a real reason for optimism here for this team going forward about their chances to win a national title.
And obviously, because of what happened in the Michigan game, so much discussion about their offense. But what's been consistent for them all year long is their defense. And they have a lot of players at every level that can change that game. And this was really one of the first games this year. I know they've played well, but you haven't seen JTT and Sawyer take over a game. And I think they have the potential to do that. And they were able to do that against the Tennessee front and a quarterback who was overmatched. I mean, let's just put it that way. Ohio State had a clear advantage at quarterback in this game, but a lot of that was because of the pressure that they were getting off the ends. And when you have a defense that's played consistently well all year long and has playmakers on all 3 levels, and then to get that type of JTT and for Sawyer to have a game-wrecking type of game, man, everyone's talking about the offense after this game for Ohio State, and understandably so, because that was the question mark. But this is a championship defense, and it's been the entire season.
You're 100% right. 100% right. And with that fast start the offense got off to, they made sure this was not going to be a game. Oh, like I said, first quarter, like you said, you blinked, all of a sudden it's like, okay, you get settled in, maybe you're a little late to your seat or the TV, and all of a sudden you put on the TV, it's 21-0. This game's over. Nico Iamaleava just never looked comfortable all game long. And I know, look, you could say, oh, well, Dylan Sampson only got 2 carries. He got hurt, missed most of the game. Look, I don't care if Dylan Sampson ran the ball every play in that game. That outcome is not changing. Maybe they have 1 extra touchdown, Tennessee does. They were never going to be in that game, whether their star running back was in or out. That's just how dominant that defense was. The defensive line was owning the line of scrimmage. They got after Nico. He's confused all game long. The receivers weren't getting any separation. It was easily, right? Their best game of the season. Most well-rounded. They took care of the football, offense, defense, passing game, running game. Everything was clicking. Shout out to the run game, too, by the way. And they finished this game 156 yards on the ground as a team, 4 rushing touchdown, Tripp. Again, I thought the passing game would have success because that was a weakness for Tennessee's defense. But still, even with that said, I did not expect a big effort at all in the run game. And I think Ryan Day deserves credit because he has now shown you when he has some time off, right? And in this case, it was a few weeks to prepare for this game. He can make adjustments. Like when he has time, he is good enough to scheme up and make sure that weaknesses, in this case on the offensive line, are covered up as much as they possibly can be. I think he deserves credit for that game plan as well. Chip Kelly deserves credit for being more aggressive and being more creative than they were the last time we saw them. This was easily, and at the perfect time, easily their best game of the season in all facets.
That said, though, right, this probably Ryan Day, the pressure's off for a couple of days, but now they're going to have to go to the Rose Bowl and take on the top team in the country, Oregon, a team they played to a 1-point game, could have won on the road in Eugene earlier this season, a very incredibly hostile environment. And while the pressure's off Ryan Day for now, and they beat an SEC team in this opening round, there's still going to be that discussion of, okay, this is an Ohio State team that had national championship aspirations coming in. Not only are they one win from a national championship, not only are they two, they're still 3 wins away from getting to that point. And if they fall short, look, it's a Rose Bowl game against the number 1 team in the country. You just beat an SEC team. I think because of their path, there may be a little forgiveness there, but there's still a lot of pressure on Ohio State to go to the Rose Bowl and defeat Oregon to get to a national semifinal. Because if you lose to Michigan at home to end your regular season and you don't even make it to the national semifinals this year, that's still going to be considered a disappointment for pretty much every fan in Columbus.
No, you're right. Expectations before the year, you're 100% right. And with that said, now with all the heat and the attention on Ryan Day and the questions about how this Ohio State team was going to come out, would they back their coach? Would there be any sort of fire here? With the fans, how would they react to this team after the last time we saw them out? We talked about before, Kirk Herbstreit, right? Voice of college football, also voice of Ohio State at being there, playing there. Where he was asked during the midst of the blowout here, got to fill some airtime. He was asked by his play-by-play partner, Chris Fowler, basically, hey, does this win take pressure off of Ryan Day? Kirk, if you thought he was strong in his Indiana analysis, well, take a listen to this, how he kind of described and talked about Ohio State fans when it comes to Ryan Day.
Kirk, how much of this softens the blow that Michigan lost? More work to do, right, for folks to forgive and forget that one?
I can't speak on behalf of the lunatic fringe. I'm not sure how they operate. I'm sure they'll be happy tonight, be fired up about what the Ohio State team did, but God forbid they lose to Oregon. They may want to fire him again. First Take tried to fire him. They thought he was done. So I'll be excited to see what they talk about on Monday after this performance.
I love the in-network chirps.
And in fan base, these are his people.
Ryan Day's going nowhere. And Ryan Day doesn't deserve to be fired. He's going nowhere. And there is a lunatic fringe in college football. Every single school has it. I think if you live on social media, you live on message boards, you think the 10 to 15% is the majority. Well, often it's just kind of that 10 to 15% that's the vocal minority, but their voices do carry a lot of weight. And you know what? So do some of the boosters who are a part of that vocal minority, that their voice carries a lot of weight. I thought, whatever you want to make of his comments about Indiana, I thought those were off base. I thought this was spot on. Right. Yeah. My question, whenever anyone always asks, people ask this, obviously being around Penn State all the time and about James Franklin. It's always, well, who are you going to replace him with? Like, who is Ohio State going to replace Ryan Day with? Give me a name.
I can't.
Oh, wait. Yeah, there's no better option.
Mike Vrabel, would he go back to his alma mater? I don't know. And by the way, is Mike Vrabel a better, I have no idea if he's a good college coach to get with. It's a different game and different landscape. Is Urban Meyer coming out of retirement trip? I don't think so. I don't think
Kirk
that's the best
got that one right
anyway.
Kirk got that one right.
And it's like, to your point, you look at what Ryan Day's done. The guy is 67-10 in his Ohio State tenure. You look at now his record in big games. He's now 12-8 versus the top 10. But again, we talked about it. He has a Michigan problem, which I think is separate from everything else. Mm-hmm. You take away the Michigan games in which they've played, 3 times they were top 10, 2021, 2022, 2023. He's now 12-5. I get top that. 10 opponents.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but if you're at Ohio State, you can't. You can't just say, oh, well, he has a Michigan problem. Let's just remove those games. They are important, and they are big games for them. So that does carry some weight, which I get. But in a 12-team playoff in modern college football, as much as that game means something to you and your fan base, and everyone's going to say, listen to this, you don't get it. You didn't go to Michigan. You didn't go to Ohio State. You can't just judge a coach in the modern era off of that. You just can't. It's not fair. But I get it. I do get it. I'm not trying to poo-poo that.
Yes. I'm not trying to diminish the rivalry. What I'm at least trying to highlight is that I think both can be true. Ryan Day does have a Michigan problem, and that is that is a real thing. And that's a problem he has to fix, no doubt about it. He deserves criticism for right now being 0 for his last 4 and really not changing anything and really out-coaching him and out-thinking himself in those games. With that said, well, he can't beat your number one rival. He beats, for the most part, every other good team, or at least has Ohio State competitive against every other good team. And year in, year out, whether you beat Michigan or not, you are still in position to win a national title. And I think while you are frustrated, yes, about not beating Michigan, I think you can accept the fact that, okay, we are still competing right now and we are in a spot where we can win a national title this season, almost every season. They're not going 7-5 every year. They're not going 9-3. They're not playing in the Peach Bowl in a non-CFP game. They're 60 minutes away from making the Final Four and probably being one of the best teams, if not the best team left, if they can beat Oregon in the field. Take that and make sure that weighs equally to the Michigan criticism. That's all I'm trying to outline here because it's still important. Like, you want to beat Michigan, no doubt about it. But winning national titles, no second. It's not a consolation prize. It's a damn important and impressive piece of the puzzle. And that's one thing I don't think Urban Meyer, I don't want to dive into this too much, but I just want to mention this one point about Urban Meyer. He owned Michigan. Outside of 2014, right, and they won the national title. I'm not trying to poo-poo that either. But a lot of those other playoff games that Ohio State got into, they were not competitive. Like, Ohio State's obviously lost, right? They lost the national title. Alabama, they lost to Clemson. Like, they lost to Georgia. At least Ryan Day's giving them a chance to win. A lot of those games are Urban after the national title year. They're getting blown out. Again, just take a deep breath, take a step back, and realize everything in context and the equal weight to Michigan and national title, I think, should be there. And I don't think it is for the most part. At least it definitely is not with the lunatic fringe that Kirk is calling out here on the broadcast.
If you told me that the phrase poo-poo would have been used 3 times in the first 30 minutes of our podcast today, like, happy holidays, everyone.
Check, yeah.
And it's not like either of us have little kids either, like running around, and we're not doing diapers every day.
That's true. We're not watching our language, thankfully, and having to use code words or speak anytime soon.
Hey, I'm not watching Bluey before bed. Let me put it that way.
God bless if you are. Yeah.
Some of our loyal listeners are. Let's turn the page to Penn State, a game that you and I were both at here in Happy Valley. I think before we get into what we loved about the game, the most disappointing thing is we were supposed to meet up at Champs after the game on Saturday night, and you called it an early night and didn't even come out for a dirty Sprite. Like, what happened to you after the game? We're going to do live post-game reactions from Champs downtown. I think it would have made a dynamite segment for our podcast today. Get some liquor-infused fans' opinions here on the podcast. What could go wrong? But you were a no-show, man. And I even FaceTimed you with some of our podcast listeners from the bar, and he didn't even accept the FaceTime.
I am very disappointed in myself, I will say. I don't have it like I used to. Clearly you do. I give you a lot of credit. The 6 a.m. wake-up call, I couldn't hang. I'm washed up. All right, maybe we should change the podcast to washed up. I'm sorry. I'm not still enrolled in college. The college days are far. I'm very disappointed in myself, I will say. I don't know where the night went, and all of a sudden, I'm like, the exhaustion. I don't got it. I'm sorry. You got to carry us here going forward.
Well, when did you get in town? Give us a little recap of your Penn State weekend.
So it was a bros trip. My dad and I, we made the trip Friday. Got in town around 4:00 or so on Friday.
Yep.
Went to local whiskey. Got a nice little dinner, or not Central Reservation. That was it.
Best food in local whiskey, Central Reservation. Like, maybe some of the best food in State College.
I agree. That's a place now. It's been my go-to. We went when we came for the Ohio State game.
Mm-hmm.
We went there. So that's now starting to be like a good spot watching Notre Dame Indiana game. Really good. I think it's a good space, warm, good. So like, it is checks a lot of boxes.
Gem.
We went there.
I don't want to talk about it too much because it's a gem that's you never have to get in line for, and I don't want too many people to find out. But it's kind of like you're looking for a chill vibe, but still good food, good people, still get that downtown atmosphere. might be the place to go.
I think you're right. It sucks. Don't go there. Go anywhere else. Do not go to Central Reservation. It's not fun. The food stinks. The atmosphere is not very good. The TV situation is awful. Do not go. Go anywhere else, please. Pickles, Champs, P-Mans. Go cafe. Go give them your business. That's the place you don't want to spend any time at for sure. But called it like we watched the second half of Notre Dame, Indiana. Well, try to watch the second half of Notre Dame, Indiana, at least with how much of a blowout that was. We'll get to that game here in a little bit. At the Airbnb, try to go to bed around 11:30, 12. Alarm went off at 6. We're out of the Airbnb on the road by 7:15. And in the parking lots by 7:30. Also, too, the last time I went to State College for the Ohio State game, we left a little bit later, let's say around 8. And my parents missed the beginning of the game driving 3 miles because the traffic was bumper to bumper and no one was moving. So we made sure this time, okay, we're not letting that happen again. If we got to wake up a little bit earlier and leave a little bit earlier, we're going to suck it up because the alternative is sitting in hours worth of traffic, inching along and missing the start of a big game. That's not going to happen this time. So thankfully we got there plenty of time. We had a nice little setup here, a little canopy, kind of put some tarps around to kind of fence us in, had a heater. So it was nice. So we're nice and warm, nice and toasty. Got in the stadium nice and early for the pregame, got to see the entrance, which by the way, really fast here, because you were in the stadium longer than I was. I got in about 20 minutes left in the pregame. There's always a lot of talk about they were going to play an SMU welcome video. Did they do that before I got in? I assume it was going to be the kind of when they ran out of the tunnel.
Yeah, so did I. They certainly didn't do it when they ran out of the tunnel. Now, I heard through the grapevine that the requirement was just to play it at some point. So I'm not sure if they played it like when the teams first arrived and were out there warming up. But to your point, it was and I know this was the case in Columbus, and I know it was the case in South Bend, I know it was the case in Austin. With the exception of that intro video, whenever it was played for any of those schools, it was a home game.
Yes. And as it should be.
It was home for all of this is the NCAA. Number one, this is an NCAA event. The college football playoff is separate from the NCAA. Number two, it was a home game. So for all of the people and all this hoopla, and I think you saw it too. Yeah, you talked about a Vol takeover in Columbus, and you saw a lot of orange, but it was still an unbelievable Ohio State atmosphere. And there was a lot of talk in Happy Valley and in Austin. Well, tickets. It was the loudest I've heard Beaver Stadium in a long time, maybe ever. So for all that other nonsense talk and Christmas and ticket prices and weather, they were home games, and it was awesome. It was awesome.
This is a good life lesson, not just college football related. This is a life lesson.
Yeah.
Don't always believe what you see on social media. Because like you said, if you just lived online these 2 weeks going into these first round matchups, you would have thought it was the most neutral site home game ever, that they were going to try to, hype up the away team as much as possible. No one was going to be in these games. Everything you were seeing on social media about all different home, different teams, Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State. And then you see, like you said, how the actual atmospheres, the game setup played out. Yeah. Night and day difference. Just remember, especially now in this day and age where misinformation is spread faster than ever. So take everything you see with a grain of salt.
And that's the thing, in this 24/7, 365 news cycle now, and for people who live online, live on social media, and you're constantly what is the discussion? What is the discussion? I think we try to find things and make things up that may not exist just to fill that void, because you feel like you need something to every time you're scrolling or every time that you pick up your phone, you want something new, you want something fresh, and to produce and generate takes that can carry us through 2 weeks in the lead up from the conference championship games until these games. At what point do you start to sift through and just go, okay, we got enough. Let's wait and see how the whole thing plays out. And I thought the atmosphere at Beaver Stadium was you've been to some big games there. I thought it was as good as any game, no matter what time, noon, 4, 8, whatever it is. I thought it was unbelievable. And the crowd played a huge factor in the game.
Oh, but Kevin Jennings, SMU, you could they were discombobulated. They were just, how it was 3 or 4, I think it was false starts or delay of games. They were clearly rattled by the noise. They're not ready for it. That crowd had I would probably argue the biggest impact of any of the 4 first-round matchups, just with how much it impacted their offense and their inability to move the ball. Right. A lot of questions. And I'll be honest, I didn't really know what to expect. I was a little nervous coming in on Saturday morning. I'm like, this is almost too easy that we're getting in. Is this going to be a stadium where it's like there's 70,000, 80,000, and we're going to be, looking at an embarrassing effort and show out? And it was anything but. I don't want to say pleasantly surprised, but very impressed with how Penn State showed out. The whiteout in cold weather where not everyone has white jackets, I thought looked pretty good for the most part, as well considering the weather. And like you said, had a huge impact here. What was your biggest takeaway from that game? Looking at Penn State's blowout win over SMU, what kind of stood out to you the most?
Yeah, I think this is what's interesting, and I think it's a theme that carries throughout some of the games, the other games as well. Like the Clemson-Texas game, I think you'll see it again this round with Texas and Arizona State and Penn State and Boise State, right? The stats for SMU were really impressive coming in. This is the nation's 4th best run defense. They've put up a ton of points. Obviously, a really talented team. But ultimately, how do their stats stack up against what you see on film and on the field? Because in the Big Ten, in the SEC, and it's not that the ACC and Big 12 and the Group of 5 that there can't be good teams and there can't be a team that wins one of these games. I'm not saying that. But the stats are inflated. Just because of the overall quality of schedule, the stats are inflated. And I was really curious to see, especially in this game, how SMU performed comparable to what we kind of saw on the stat sheet. Was their run defense really one of the best run defenses in the country? They did not give up a lot of sacks this year. Would Penn State's defensive line be able to get pressure? And on film, you thought they would be against their defensive tackles. Would Penn State's offensive line be able to protect Drew Aller against a really good, statistically, SMU pass rush that had 40 sacks on the season coming in? So that to me was like, okay, I can point to these elements of the game, but I'm not completely sure, even though I've seen it on tape, like I'm not completely sure. I thought my biggest takeaway from this game, Penn State's defense is unbelievable.
Similar, my biggest takeaway is the fact that I love that Penn State can win in different ways. And that's, I think, in this time in football in general, I think the more one-dimensional you are, the harder it is to win. Because if that one thing is taken away or not clicking on all cylinders, what else can you lean on? And Penn State, we saw it at different points this year, right? They've relied on the run game. They've relied on their quarterback. They've relied on their tight end. They've relied on their defense, right? They have won games in different areas. The last time we saw Penn State, Big Ten title game, that defense was a sieve, right? They got absolutely shredded. And the only reason why they're in that game is because of the offense, the rushing attack, Drew Aller. And in this game, the offense got off to a slow start. The first 2 touchdowns scored were by their defense in pick sixes. They got 3 interceptions in the first half. And you saw just a different defense that said, you know what? We got this. Like Drew Aller's fine. He was subpar. It was one of his quieter games of the season. It didn't matter.
Can I make a comment on that really quick? Sure. Being at field level, where you sat in the stands, what way was the wind blowing?
At my back. We were facing the student section in the opposite end zone. So I guess what's the north end zone? I never know the direction.
So it was blowing from north to south, right? You look at the flags, They were howling from north to south. On the field, the wind was blowing to the north.
Really?
The wind was blowing into the south end zone, and it was swirling back to the north. So you could not, like, I know it's easy just to look at Drew's numbers, and he certainly missed some throws that he'd like to have back. But I think the wind was a way bigger factor than anyone realized at field level. Rogers, SMU's kicker, had 7 field goals of 50 yards and plus this year, and he missed one short from 42, kicking into that south end zone where where you're sitting, you're like, oh, he's got the wind. He didn't. I mean, the kick hit a wall.
Fascinating.
I think the elements really played a major factor in this game, in the passing game, and I would not worry at all. Like, I think Drew Aller's the quarterback you saw in Indianapolis, but then you can really easily say, well, Drew Aller had a subpar game. Statistically, passing the ball, they weren't able to get a passing game going in rhythm. That said, his ability with his legs to create, keep plays alive, pick up, 3-4 yards, or even that one time he scampered down the sideline, a big first down. I think it was like a 3rd and 8 too, where he tightrope the sidelines and not make the big mistake, right? This, you knew it was going to be a defensive game because of those elements. Well, Jennings throws 2 pick sixes in the opening 17 minutes of the game. Game's over. Game's over. And that doesn't make the big mistake. He makes plays with his legs. It was a very, and this is what I compared it to on the radio, it was a very Josh Allen, Big Ben, maybe like a Jalen Hurts. It was a very much, I'm a winner, and I might not be able to pass today, but I've got more than that. And that's the type of game he played. So I'm not one to quickly just go, subpar for Drew Aller. I don't buy that.
Elements for sure had a factor, but but the point I'm trying to make is not like, I'm trying to dissect Drew, and I'm not worried about his play at all.
Yep.
But I think what's encouraging is the fact that Penn State does not need him to be the quarterback we saw in Indy in order for them to win a lot of games, or the quarterback we saw in the second half at USC to win a lot of games. They have different ways to win. And like you said, that defense was so good, 2 pick sixes, and all of a sudden there's no chance SMU's coming back. You see how they were playing defensively. Like the defense said, hey, look, we got this. And I think if you're Penn State, if you can go into any game saying, okay, we can win games with our defense. We can win games by just running the ball down the other team's throat. We can win games with our quarterback just having a great day and picking them apart and looking like an NFL guy. Like, you can now, there are 3, maybe 4 paths for Penn State to win here, playoff games against really good teams. That's encouraging. Because again, if they were solely reliant on Drew Aller, you know what, then to your point, then maybe with that game, the way he had it, Penn State maybe can't run the ball. Maybe the defense again picked apart, and all of a sudden we're talking about an SMU upset because they can only do one thing well. They showed you in this game they could do 3 or 4 things well, and maybe even when they're not at their A game, I thought the run game was solid. We saw better performances from them, but still, it was dominant. It was rhythmic. They're keeping drives alive. They're making plays when they had to. They made, I think, the winning play Tripp almost all day long in this game without really ever looking, especially offensively, like their best.
Yep.
Which is encouraging because there's still so much room for them to go. And as the competition increases, you're going to need to play better. And I think they will.
And I think you could probably say that about all 3 of the Big Ten teams remaining, Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State, that Ohio State can throw the ball if they have to. We think they can run the ball if they have to. Like, they've shown it, maybe not as consistently as Penn State has this year in the ability to win games in different ways. I think Oregon's that way as well, even though they've put up the gaudier numbers. And that's why I think all 3 Big Ten teams right now are probably the 3 leaders in the clubhouse for me as to who's left standing at the end of this thing. And right, one of them's going to knock each other out here in the next round. But I think Penn State with their path against Boise State and then against a Georgia team that right now is down to its backup quarterback, Notre Dame that's a one-dimensional offense. Like, I would be pretty surprised if Penn State's not in the national championship at this point. That's the type of football team I think they have. And you mentioned those pick sixes. Like, as I said, my big takeaway was how incredible their defense was in this game. Tony Rojas had his best game of the year. Kozai Izzard at defensive tackle had his best game of the year. And these are guys that aren't the household names that you're used to talking about. Like Dennis Sutton and Carter were unbelievable for him. And they did a good job. They made Jennings run around. Like, I think they got 3 sacks on him. Okay. But they were in his face the entire game and this was an SMU team that was susceptible to turnovers, and Penn State forced him to make bad decisions and forced them to turn the ball over. And not only was it the 2 pick sixes that the defense had, SMU had a 4th and 1 where it looked like Jennings could probably have run for the first down, but he decided to throw it. Throw wasn't good, but also Penn State at least had a guy there that when the tight end tried to bobble it and catch it, he jarred it free. So they got to stop. Again, part luck, but they got to stop. 4th down, deep in their own territory to start the game. And then up 14-0, I think a lot of people are thinking situationally, James Franklin, like, I think there's 2 takeaways from that, right? The 4th and short, where you go for it at your own 19-yard line. Number 1, that shows the gumption and conviction that James Franklin has shown over the second half of the season in playing to win football games and not to lose games and trusting his guys. So because of that, I like the call. I don't know that was the right situation for it, though. Being up 14-0 against a team that's proven they can't really move the ball. It's cold. Kick it out of there. If it's at the 35, 40-yard line, sure. Like, in your own territory. But inside the 20, you're basically saying, okay, here's at least 3 points for you. So the 2 pick sixes obviously are huge because you put points on the board. But the 4th down stop early, and then for DeLuca to get a second pick right there and get the ball back, and you don't give up any points in that situation. Those are 2 scenarios where the defense obviously is getting all the attention for the pick sixes, but made huge plays early in the football game. Then they got the run game going. And once Penn State's big guys up front, and they did it for a decent chunk of time with Nolan Rucci on the bench. And then he was able to come back in. But for them to lean on them against a run defense that was averaging 2.7 yards per carry against, and Singleton and Allen both averaged 6.4, so 6.5 yards a carry. That's outstanding. And that's what we thought, right? We thought Penn State, because of their ability up front in the trenches, ultimately would be better than the ACC team. And they were. A team that 2 years ago was in the American. And ultimately, they were. And then they rode that crowd. And that's exactly how you thought it would play out, right? And like, I know we're going to turn the page real quick here to Notre Dame, Indiana. Same thing there. You thought Notre Dame, because of their guys up front, like they'd be able to lean on them and eventually just wear them down and put them away. Well, they got a 98-yard touchdown run from Love. That was all she wrote, because Indiana never could do anything at the line. And that's what allows these teams that are the better teams to win in these cold weather type games. Not always be pretty, not always be perfect, but ultimately being better, more physical, deeper in the trenches is the difference.
2 quick things I just want to put a cap on for Penn State SMU. I'm glad you brought up the 4th and short decision. I actually had no problem with that. I had a bigger problem with the 4th and 11 that when Penn State had the ball, I think it was like the SMU 26-yard line in field goal territory.
They weren't in field goal range because of the wind. They weren't in field goal range.
That's good to see. That's, again, where I'm sitting, north end zone, wind's at my back. You're assuming, okay, he's got it, and that would have been what, about a 46-yarder
That's the same
roughly?
Kick that the SMU kicker missed short in that direction, a guy who's made 7 kicks of 50 yards or more this year. They weren't in field goal range. And when we went off at halftime, I asked James Franklin about the offense and the conditions, and he said, we can't throw going in this direction.
Interesting. That's good context, because that was, for me, I had a bigger problem with that 4th down than going for it on 4th and 1 and trusting your guys to get 1 yard at your own 20-yard line. That was my bigger – thank you for that context. I did not see that again. Even just – it's crazy. In the stadium, you still don't feel, the difference there at the wind, how much it was swirling, how much it was having a real impact. The other thing here, speaking of impact, did you see this where so many SMU private jets came up to State College the morning of that a few private jets, one including Craig James, right, the tremendous SMU running back, and Bryson DeChambeau were rerouted to Williamsport, and they ended up missing the first quarter of the game because they had to take a bus an hour, difference, and they thought they were just going to pull up to State College. You see that?
I did. What's even most surprising, I think, about that whole thing is if that was a Fullington bus, that they made it from Williamsport to State College.
It's also true. Let me tell you this. If it was a megabus, they would have overbooked and they would have been left on the side of the road because there would have been no seats available. So you're right. At least they got there. But, man, that's talking about adding
hey, here you go. You're down 14-0 because your team threw 2 pick sixes.
And also, as we know, driving through central Pennsylvania, you're trying to stream the game on your phone. Good luck trying to get service from Williamsport to State College as well as the first quarter of your first ever playoff game is going on. And here you are in a bus. Yeah. Trying to get there, man. Rich people problems. That's why Tripp maybe being poor is the way to go. You're driving the day before. You can't have the option of flying private right into State College. You don't have the option of getting X'd out or canceled out because there's too many people with the same idea. That was interesting. It's very funny to say the least here.
That's a problem that we all encounter a couple of times in our life. Not being able to land our plane because the FBO is full.
Hate that, right?
Yeah.
Nothing grinds my gears more. It's almost as bad as having to go to Harrisburg for a flight to the West Coast, right?
Oh, come on. Just to put a bow on that, can I ask one more thing?
Sure.
Where'd you end up after the game that you didn't make it?
Well, number one, we try to drive our car downtown, which similar to coming in the morning for Ohio State, leaving the Beaver Stadium tailgate lots after the game was an absolute nightmare. We sat in our parking spot, car on, ready to get in line to leave. We sat there for an hour, did not move an inch. No one around us moved. We eventually kind of backed up and went a back way. So it took about an hour and a half just to leave the stadium, get downtown. We went to Sharky's for a little bit. We made it into P-Man's. We stopped at, was it Yalo Taco? I think, was their first ever encounter there. Great food.
Good.
So well, yeah, solid. You know, if they want to sponsor us, we'll hype it up even more. Shameless plug. And then after P-Man's finished one more time at a place that will not be named that we told you to not go to because it's not very good. And that was it. So I apologize. Thankfully, I heard you were the life of the party at Champ. So I'm glad you at least made up for my lack of presence by making sure the party was going on all night long.
Well, we had a couple of your other friends that were there that wanted to see you too. So that's okay.
Make me feel worse.
Half of our podcast audience was hoping to meet you, and you disappointed.
Yeah, I probably did myself a favor and them a favor. Why don't you meet me in person? You can attest. There's not much there. Probably staying a mystery is better for my aura.
Should we get to Notre Dame, Indiana?
Yeah, let's finish on. We started this pod on a little bit of a frustrating note, disappointing note with how much backlash there was. But let's finish off here with Indiana's, I would say, disappointing loss to Notre Dame.
I talked about it. I think the difference in the game, we're going to get to Curt Cignetti, and I think his brashness and his decision-making in this game. But this was all about Notre Dame and just winning the battle up front. They neutralized Indiana's defensive line with their run game. Time of possession, Notre Dame nearly 36 minutes time of possession. They got into third and shorts. They were 7 for 13 on third downs, and they ran the ball incredibly well. 193 rush yards, you know, not only with Love, but Leonard. That whole backfield's really good, and Indiana just never had a response for it. Here's the thing. It was still only 7-0 after the first quarter, and it was still a 2-possession game at halftime. And for all that gumption that Indiana has showed this year, they kind of proved to us in this game that they weren't, like, surprisingly, they trailed so little during the regular season. We never got to see what they were like from playing from behind. And they couldn't do it. Like, once it was 7-0, it felt like it was over. It just felt like it was over. Curtis Rourke never got on track, never got into a rhythm, and a lot of credit, exceptional Notre Dame defense. But they were overwhelmed. Curt Cignetti was overwhelmed when they went behind. Like, at 7-0, it felt like it was over. And again, a lot of it is Notre Dame that they'll just lean on you, wear on you. It ends 27-17. And, you know, they actually have a 2-point conversion at the end. If they get it, they have a chance for another onside kick. But ultimately, it was a 27-3 game. Right. And they just leaned on them, wore them down. And Indiana went in. That's the biggest thing. Is like, why did they, when they were so brash all year, and Curt Cignetti was so brash all year, certainly being worn down is one thing, but why did they just go into a shell and roll over and hoist the white flag? Because they did.
And that's the biggest disappointment for me. It's not that they lost, or it's not they even, got out physical. It's the fact that, like you said, it's the talk is one thing and the actions are another. And it's one thing to be aggressive and brash and outgoing against UCLA or Nebraska. We talked about it on Thursday. I really thought that they would learn from that Ohio State game. I thought they played cleaner. Again, they didn't kill themselves as much by allowing a punt return touchdown or dropping a punt snap like they did against Ohio State. So it was a little bit cleaner in that aspect. But like the overall lessons that I thought they were going to learn by that ass whooping they took to the Buckeyes, I thought that was going to help them out here. And it seemed like they didn't learn anything. It's almost like they forgot what happened at Ohio State and didn't apply any lessons at all going into this game. And I think it's made worse when you have Curt Cignetti, which I was a little surprised on the game they set that close to game time. It was like, what, an hour and a half out, and there he is yucking it up. Yeah. I was a little surprised to see that. But then to say, we don't just beat top 25 teams, we beat the crap out of them. To have this, again, like aggressive persona, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to basically go in here. I'm going to tell you I'm going to take it. Then I'm going to take it, personality. And then to just, like you said, act cowardly after that first interception by Curtis Rourke in Notre Dame territory, to then run the ball on third down and long, to have some of those surrender punts, to not be aggressive, to basically play, okay, we're just going to make this look like the score is better than it is. We're just going to hope that some things come our way, but we're not going to go out and take it. That was really disappointing. And now that's the case in two of the biggest games for Indiana this season. It's a whole new roster next year, right, with so many guys that were having 1 year of eligibility left. So you're going to see a whole different team next year for Indiana. So now it's about trying to get that identity. But I think it's frustrating that their head coach talks one way and then in the two biggest games of the year acts completely different. That was, at least for me, the biggest disappointment, is that it felt like nothing was learned from that Ohio State loss.
And like, I don't know if there's any more to take away from this game than that. Like that basically sums it up. Like sums it up.
Can I be that guy for a second? I hate to play this game, but I'm going to try to play it here. Because you said like Notre Dame ran the ball well, and they did. But I know people hate when this game is played, if you take away Jeremiah Love's 98-yard touchdown run, basically Notre Dame runs for 100 yards in this game. Now, that's a huge touchdown play, change momentum big time. Mm-hmm. But other than Indiana's defense, especially the defensive line, I think they held their own. They gave him a chance.
Yeah.
And the offense, now, the offense did nothing. So, like you mentioned, the time possession, it's almost 2-1. When you're on the field that long, you're going to get worn down, and kind of saw the floodgates open in the late third, early fourth quarter. But it's like, while the score at the end seems closer, and for a while it was kind of a blow, like they were in that game for a while, and just it felt like offensively they never able to put it together. And then again, coaching decision wise, 3rd and 10, you're handing it off, almost basically surrendering, like
punting,
the lack of aggressive. Yeah, it was honestly pathetic.
Yeah, the defense. I think it's a good point you make. Like the defense allowed them a chance to hang around, but just because they were hanging around, it never felt like they were in it.
Right. Because every time you see the offense on the field, they couldn't do anything.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame for Indiana because I think nationally, like, okay, this is a historic season for them, unprecedented. They're in a college football playoff for the first time. Like they made the college football playoff for the first time the same time Penn State did. Like, put it in that kind of perspective where Penn State's been like knocking on the door for a decade here, and Indiana, here they are, they're in. But I think nationally, whether they care or not, it's one thing. But I think some of the luster of this historic magical season's kind of lost because the perception is going to be, they went 11-2, but they never beat anybody to get to those 11 wins. But I don't care who you beat. For Indiana football to win 11 games is unthinkable. Like this is an unprecedented historic season, and they fell flat in their two biggest games of the year. There's no question. But to me, it doesn't take away, like, if you're around the Big Ten, that's a basketball school, that's a football program, that was a doormat. They were picked 17th out of 18 teams in the league. For Indiana to go 11-2 and be in the playoff, I hope it doesn't subtract from what they accomplished this year, because it still is unprecedented and unthinkable.
And while the roster will turn over, what I think gives you hope going forward is the fact that, look, Kirk Cignetti has won everywhere he's gone, right? We've seen him win big games at JMU and always have him in the postseason. So this is a guy that's used to success, which I think also leads to the disappointment of just like he's used to coaching in big games, and to see him kind of just on a big stage almost get like frightened by the lights was a little disappointing. But this is a guy in his career that's won big, won consistently. He did it in year number one. You hope that again now with recruiting, transfer portal, still identifying some talent there, hitting on this, really the quarterback's going to be the big one here for Indiana going forward. If you can hit on that, develop them, like there's still a bright future for Indiana. I don't think this is like, we won't see this for another 100 years. I think they'll be in the mix again shortly here. But like you said, if you're an Indiana fan, again, I don't think you really care what if Kirk Herbstreit saying they shouldn't be in there. Like whatever, you were in there, you went 11-2, is the best year you've ever seen in your entire life. Maybe a few days will go by before truly you could look back and feel appreciation. Maybe the loss is still stinging here as we're recording this on Monday morning. I get it. Like you're still upset by it and want to see a better fight. But next week, next month, next year, you're going to look back on this season being the best season Indiana football has ever had. You're going to look back on this 30 years from now, reminiscing about this season. Like that's what matters too. And like I said, now it's not just that you got there. Now for Indiana, it's getting there again.
Yeah, and that's the thing right there. That's what I was going to jump in and say. It's changed the perception of Indiana football. Like now you go into next year thinking, okay, what can we do to get there again? Like it is possible. So instead of now just thinking it's impossible, it's changed the entire complexion of their program and probably the direction of their program moving forward with the investment that they've made in their head coach. National Coach of the Year, unbelievable year, but ultimately were uncompetitive in their two biggest games of the season.
You're right. Now that's the next stepping stone for Indiana, which, hey, just the fact that we're talking about that, right, is a big win for them.
They could very easily be Purdue right now. Like
that's you're right. You're right. 1-11, non-competitive in every game they've played. Yeah, there's a lot worse places to be if you're Indiana. And for the most part, if you're an Indiana football fan, you've been in those worst places for most of your lifetime. So good season overall. Yeah, that's fair. All of your lifetime outside of this 1 year. Big Ten goes 2-1 in round number 1, which means we got some good round 2 matchups. Tripp, you'll be in Arizona for the Fiesta Bowl. Penn State, Boise State. We have obviously Ohio State, Oregon in the Rose Bowl as well. So 2 really good matchups, 2 really exciting matchups. Even though it's the holidays, we're still keeping our schedule the same. So keep an eye out. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Still Enrolled is the title in case you don't see it here on YouTube where you forget the name. We're going to be back after Christmas to see, number 1, if Tripp got cold. I'd probably assume yes. And number 2, start to give you an early preview of what the second round of the – you don't like that? That was good.
Wow. I hope you didn't stay up all night thinking of that one.
That's why I went to bed so early on Saturday. I needed a good transition.
You weren't making it to champs. I'm not surprised you went to P-Mans, though. That is very much like when I think of you, that's like Bro City. That's your type of crowd.
What's the difference between P-Mans and champs? It's the same thing. Same crowd, same vibe. What are you better than
you? Weren't
P-Mans?
In a frat, were you? Were you in a frat?
I was not. No, sir. Not cool enough.
You could have passed for a frat boy.
Thanks. I know you're not saying that in a I know you're not saying that in a complimentary way. So thanks, Tripp. Really, really appreciate the love there. Christmas spirit's really in the air.
You're the one who started it. You're coming at me with the Cole comment.
Fair. So check it out. Thursday, we'll be back here dropping a new podcast in your feed. We'll also be back next week to give you a really deep dive here on both of those Big Ten games as well.
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
I'm trying to wrap up and we've yapped for long enough. But and this is all that stands between me and driving home for the holidays. But our audience, thank you. I know it's not like a huge audience. We're not a national global brand yet. But thanks for listening. Enjoy your holiday season. Make it a happy, healthy, safe holiday. There's nothing we love more than talking college football each and every week, twice a week, and sharing these podcasts, our guests, all that with you. And in all sincerity, my friend, happy holidays to you and your family, Lauren, everyone. Happy holidays. Lauren's there, right? Is there anything special planned for this holiday season?
No, okay. There is not.
Okay.
Yes. Be a quiet Christmas this year, to say the least.
Okay.
Very nice. The Grinch has a heart after all. Look at that. Very nicely said. I echo everything Tripp does say. Like I said, you guys have been tremendous. We appreciate the support. It's been a lot of fun, and hopefully this will continue for a long, long, long time beyond just this season as well. That is possible because of you. Happy holidays. Enjoy them. We'll talk to you on Thursday right here on the Still Enrolled podcast.